so we are back. We are going to make a tutorial for the Mastermind program. So first thing I'm going to do is create a new REPL. I'm going to choose Python. We're going to call this something like Mastermind Game, something along those lines, and click Create REPL. So this will open up a nice fresh REPL for us to use for our program. Okay, so before we start, I do want to show you one thing. I do recommend coming over to Settings, changing your indent size or indent spacing to 4. That just means you have a much larger indent, so it's very easy to see, or at least it's easier to see where you haven't indented or where you need to indent. Also, I'd recommend changing the size up to large. It's just a little easier to see, a little clearer. So that might help. Okay, so we are creating a Mastermind-style game. And don't forget, the point of Mastermind is to guess, and normally the real game is to guess an opposing player's colors. But for us, we're just going to use numbers. Okay. And the point is, the way this is going to work is the computer is going to randomly generate a list of 4 numbers. And then as the user or as the player, you are going to try to guess those numbers. The program is going to loop nonstop until you guess the numbers correctly. Okay, as soon as you guess the numbers correctly, the program will stop. It'll say, congratulations, great job. So here's what we're going to do first. So the very first thing I think we should do for this program is we're going to create a function that allows us to generate a list of secret random numbers. And so in order for me to get random numbers, first off, I need to import a library called random. Okay, and this is a built-in library for Python, right? So it's built in, but it doesn't automatically add it to your program because that would make this program run really slowly if it had all of the different features of Python. So we just import random. And random does a bunch of cool things, but the one we're going to use in this is called rand_int. Okay, rand_int is a method that generates random numbers in a range, or I'll say from a range. Okay, so we've got our library. So be sure to pause, be sure to pause the video as you are doing this, and then just come back to it when you're ready. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a function. Create a function that generates a list of random numbers. And here's how I do that. I use the keyword def. You'll see that it turns blue, and that means that I am defining a function. I'm telling Python what this function or what this little bit of code is going to do. And I'm going to call this secret_list. That's the name of the function. Now, when I'm creating a function, I have to open up some parentheses here. That tells Python that I'm creating a function, and I also need to put a colon after it. Otherwise, Python does not know what we're doing here. Now, what goes inside the parentheses is called a parameter, and this is something that the function needs in order to do whatever it is that it does. And so I'm going to actually take one parameter, and I'm going to call this the max range. And I'll explain what that means in a second. but this is going to let the user decide the range of numbers that are going to be the secret hidden numbers. So that will let the user do that. So now I hit enter. Notice how it tabs. If I do not tab and I start writing code here, you're going to get an error because Python does not know what this code down here does. It doesn't know, so it's got to be tabbed in. Now the first thing I want to do, because I'm making a list of numbers, I need to create a list first off. I'm just going to call this list secret list, just like the name of the function. I'm going to set it equal to just some empty brackets. And when I use empty brackets like this, it means that this tells Python that secret list is actually a list, but it has nothing inside it. There's nothing in that list. So we've got that. The next thing I want to do is I want to add a random number to this list. And this is actually really easy. This is how we do it. We take the name of the list that we just created, and we use a method called append. And the way I use a method is I put a dot here, and then I type the name of the method. What this does, append works on lists, and it adds whatever is inside these parentheses to the list. And what I want to add to the list is a random number. Here's how I generate a random number. I first type in the name of the library where rand_int is located. I put a dot, and I call the method. Just like I did with the dot append right here, I do the same thing with random. Random.random. Now, all of our numbers that are randomly generated will start with 1. So I'm going to put the first number of the range is 1, comma, and then the end range is actually going to be this right here. So this lets the user type in the maximum that they want for their range of numbers. And rand_int always takes 2 parameters, a start point and an end point. So I'll let the user decide how high of range they want to go with their numbers, but it will always start at 1. Okay, then the last thing I need to do, I must use the return keyword. And I want to return the list. And here's why I do this. If I don't use return, Python will do all of this stuff that I tell it to do, but it's not going to generate anything, right? It's going to do what it says, but then it's done. If I use return, when I call this function later on, it's going to create a list for me, which is super cool. So I've got to use return list. Okay? So let's pause there and make sure your screen looks like mine, and then we will test this out. All right, so we're going to test out this function. Here is how I test out the function. First off, I type the name of the function like this, just like it is above. I open some parentheses, and I need 1 parameter, right? So if I run this, I should get an error, and it says that I'm missing 1 required positional argument called max range. It's because I didn't add anything here. So I'm going to set the max range of my program at 4, or at my function at 4, and I'm going to run it. You'll see that nothing shows up though. What I actually need to do is print out what's happening here so I can see it. Okay, so notice nothing shows up when I run this function. However, if I put it inside a print statement, I wrap it with print, we should see something. Now, you'll notice that there's only 1 number there, and if I keep clicking this, it's generating random numbers between 1 and 4, right? I could change this maybe to make it a little easier to see. I could change that to 100. Now you'll see this is generating numbers between 1 and 100, including 1 and 100. But remember, I actually need to have 4 numbers on my list. So what I could do I could type this line of code 4 times, or I could just create a loop. So I'm going to use a loop, and for this type of loop, or for this type of application, I'm going to use a for loop because I know exactly how many times I want to run it. I want to run it 4 times. So I say for I is going to stand for iteration, which means I will run however many times I want it to. So I'll say for I in, and I type range, and then I type 4. I want it to run 4 times. So I represents 1 iteration of this range. So I will run on iteration 0, then 1, then 2, then 3, because it doesn't include the 4, but that means it will run 4 times because it starts on 0. So I say for I in range, I put a colon. Now you'll see this line lights up red because it's saying it's expecting it to be indented. So I just need to indent this line. Do not include the return statement in the loop because that means it'll return secret list 4 times. We don't want it to do that. Also, make sure that the secret list is empty outside of the for loop. Otherwise, every time the loop runs, it'll set the list to being empty. So let's try this out now. Let's run this. Now you'll notice I have 4 random numbers between 1 and 100. So when I click run, it's just going to generate 4 numbers, all of which should be random. Pretty cool, right? So far so good. Now, one important thing though, right now, this list is not being saved anywhere. So I actually want to save it as a variable. And I'm just going to say, I'll call it mastermind list. So mastermind list equals secret list. And then just because we're going to be doing this game now, I'll say the max number will just be 5. And then instead of actually running the function in the print statement, I'll just delete that. And all I want to do is print out the mastermind list. So when I click run, we're going to run our function that we just created up here. It's going to create a list, save it to this mastermind list, and then it prints it out. So this should look the same, except the numbers are now between 1 and 5. Okay, so we got our list. So far, so good. Let's start creating our program. So let's mastermind game run below. Okay, so down here is where we're going to actually create our mastermind game. So let's create our game. The very first thing I need to do is I'm going to print off something, and I'm going to say something like, welcome to the mastermind game, like that. And then I might print another thing that says something like, try to guess the 4 secret numbers, like that. And then what I want to do is right after this period and inside the quotation mark, I'm going to do a /. And you'll find the /. It's the button right above your return key or your enter key on your keyboard. Not to be confused with a \, which is that. That's the one that's on the question mark button. But a / and then a lowercase n. You'll see that that turns pink. What that does is it makes a space below this line of code. So the first thing I do is I say, welcome to the mastermind game. Try to guess the 4 secret numbers. Then I'm going to do this. I'm going to create a variable called guess1. And I'm going to set that equal to, first off, I want it to be an int because we're guessing numbers and not decimal numbers. And then inside of that, I'm going to use my input statement, open up some parentheses, and say, please guess the first number. I'm going to put a colon there and a space. And I put the space here so that it prints out a space so that when I type it in on the console side, it's not smashed up against this line of text. So let's take a look at this. I'm going to run it. There's our list. It says, welcome to the Mastermind game. Try to guess the 4 secret numbers. And notice my cursor is a nice little bit of space away from this writing. So I can type in a number. That should work. Now, I need to guess 4 times. So what I'm going to do is copy this line of code, and I'm going to paste it 4 times. Now, don't forget, you do have to change the variable, otherwise this won't work. So I got guess 1, guess 2, guess 3, and guess 4. And I probably want to change these 2. So guess the second number. Guess the third number. Guess the fourth number. And notice here I have 2 open parentheses. That means I have to have 2 closed parentheses. If I'm missing one of those parentheses, I'm going to get an error. So I got to make sure to close everything off. So let me run this, make sure it works. Let's see, I guess 4, 4, 5, 4. Program ended. I guessed the right numbers, but nothing happened. Obviously, I haven't told it what to do yet. So what I'm going to do now is I need to check to see if these guesses match the numbers that are in the list. And here's how I'm going to do that. This is where my if statements come in, or my selection comes in. I'm going to say if, and I'm going to first say guess 1. I'm going to start with the first number. And I'm going to use double equals, because remember, double equal signs means I'm comparing something. If I just use a single equal sign, that means it's assigning whatever's here to this variable. So I want to use double equal signs. Now, guess 1 should be this first number. This would be guess 1, this would be guess 2, guess 3, guess 4. Okay? However, in a list, so let me do this right here. Hold on one second. So in a list, right, let's say I have a list, and the list equals something like this. 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay? So in a list, though, each position within the list has an index number. And the very first number in a list is always index 0. The second index is always index 1. The third index is always index 2. And then that is index 3. So it's a little confusing, but this position is always 0 in the list. This is position 1, position 2, position 3. A little different than in Scratch. Scratch doesn't start at 0. Scratch always starts at 1. But every other programming language, the first number is always index 0. So here's what we're going to do. I want to check guess 1 against the first number of my list. So here's how I do it. I get the name of the list called secret list. That's the name of my list. I open up some brackets and make sure they're brackets and not parentheses. And then I type the number 0. Because my first guess is going to be in position 0. And then don't forget, with an if statement, I also need to do a colon, and I hit enter. Now, if that guess is correct, I need to track it some way. So I'm actually going to need a variable, and I'm going to call this variable correct. and I'm going to say correct plus equals 1. Now notice this is a red line under here. It's because I haven't told Python what correct is. So I'm actually going to come up to the top of my guesses. I'm going to say correct equals 0. So I'm going to just tell Python correct is a variable. It's going to be a number, and it's right now starting at 0. And then if guess 1 is equal to the number that's in the 0 position in my list, I add the number 1 to my correct variable. So go ahead and pause right now and make sure your screen looks like mine. Make sure you're not getting any error messages. If you are, please go back in the video and just double check to make sure everything is the same. All right, let me just run this, make sure there's no errors. And so it is saying, ooh, so notice right here, it says function object is not scriptable. I don't really expect you guys to know what that means, but here's what it means. I called a list called secret list. Notice that is actually the name of my function. My actual list is called Mastermind list. So I need to change this to Mastermind list. Because if I have like a variable like this inside of a function, this variable, all of this stuff does not exist outside of the function. So that's why I have to create a new variable to save the secret list to. So let's run that, make sure there's no errors there. Okay, so far so good. Now here's the cool part. Computer science, we have a lot of patterns, so I'm just going to copy this block. I'm going to do the same thing for each of my guesses. 2, and 3. But don't forget, I got to change this. So guess 2, guess 3, guess 4. And I also need to change these numbers. So list 0, list 1, list 2, and list 3. So if each of these, if they guess these correctly, we're going to add 1 to the correct guesses list. However, here's the one issue. This program should keep looping if the user does not guess all 4 numbers. Okay? So in order for us to get this to loop, I have to put it in a loop. And what I want to do, so the way to do that, first off, I don't want to include where I reset the variable. So what I'm going to do is just highlight all of this text, like so. Oopsies. All right, so I'm going to highlight all of this. Don't include the correct variable. And then check this out. All you have to do is hit the tab. And it'll tab your whole block of code in. And then here's what I want to do. I'm going to hit return, and I'm going to put this inside a while loop. And I want this to repeat as long as my correct answers do not equal 4. So I'm going to say while correct is less than 4. So as long as the correct variable is less than 4, this should keep looping. All right, so if I click run, did it delete stuff? Okay, good. Sometimes it deletes things. Okay, let's test this out. Okay, so far so good. Because when I looped, right? When I looped, I guessed 4 correct numbers. So the correct variable became 4, and obviously it doesn't. 4 is not less than 4, so the loop stops. So when this statement becomes false, the loop stops. However, check this out. Here's a problem. Let's say I guessed 1. Okay, that works, that works. But it just keeps going, right? I don't want it to keep going. So here's what I want to do. First thing, before we do anything else, I'm going to create one more variable. We're going to call this tries. And we're going to set this equal to 0. And what the tries means, it's going to tell the user how many tries it took them to guess the correct numbers. So after they've entered all of their numbers, and actually, you know what? I'll put the tries up here. So after they've entered all 4 guesses, we're going to say tries plus equals 1. I'm just adding 1 to tries and setting it equal to the new value. Now, here's one last thing. This is the last thing we'll do in this first part, is I'm going to put one more if statement. And I'm going to check if the value of correct, if that is still less than 4 at this point, what I want it to do is I want it to reset the correct variable. So I want to say correct equals 0. And I want it to do this. I want it to print something. It's going to print you guessed. And I'm going to put correct inside of the string. I'm going to wrap it with str, because remember, correct's a number. And in order for me to concatenate or stick together a number and a string, I have to trick Python into thinking the number is a string. So I said, you guessed blank numbers correctly. Now, one thing, I actually want to put this above where I reset correct. Otherwise, it'll always say you got 0 correct. Okay, so we should have our program just about finished now. So basically, if you remember, we created a function up top. This function creates our list for us, and it adds 4 random numbers to the list, and then it returns the list. Right here, we ran our function. We put an input of 5, or the parameter was 5, which means the list will be random numbers between 1 and 5, including 1 and 5. Then we printed it out so we could see it. We say, welcome to the Mastermind game, try to guess the 4 numbers. We take 4 inputs, save them to these 4 variables. We increment the tries, because after 4 guesses, that's 1 try. And then this little block of code here, we are checking each of the guesses against their positions in the list. If they are the same, we increment correct. So if these 2 things are the same, we increment our correct variable to show that we got that guess correct. Once we've done all that, we're going to check again one more time to see if our correct values, if they are less than 4. Because if they're less than 4, that means that our loop needs to keep going because we need to guess again. The loop only stops when the user guesses all 4 numbers. So here's what I do. So I first printed out, you guessed, and then I print out the number of correct answers that they got, or guesses that they got, if they had any. And what I'll do, because it might just be 1, it's possible you might just get like 1 number correct. So I'll change it like that so that works a little better. Yeah, so right here we are printing out, you guessed the however many they got right. And remember, I got to wrap it with str because correct is a number. This variable is a number. And then I say you got this many numbers correct, or you guessed them correctly. Then I reset my correct variable back to 0. And I type in this word called continue. And what continue does is it will take the user back up to the start of the loop. So it goes from here back to the start, and then it keeps going. Now, however, so I said if correct is less than 4. If correct is not less than 4, that means else. If it's not less than 4, that means that we actually guessed all 4 correct. So I'll say something like this. Congratulations, you guessed all 4 numbers. And then I want to say something along these lines. I want to say it took you blank tries. So I'll do plus. Don't forget I got to put tries inside an str because that means because tries is a number, so I got to put it in str to trick Python into thinking that it's a string so I can stick them all together or concatenate them. So let me just see what I wrote here. Congratulations, you guessed all 4 numbers. It took you blank tries. Now notice, if it only took 1 try, this should say try, not tries. So what I can do is this. In my else statement, I can actually say if the tries variable is equal to 1. If it's equal to 1, it's basically going to do the same thing. It's going to do the same thing, except if it's equal to 1, I want this to be try and not tries. And then else, so if it's any other number, we'll do just tries. All right, so this is what we got so far. Let's test it out, see how it works. Here we've got our program running. We got our secret list. Welcome to the Mastermind game. Try to guess the 4 secret numbers. So I'm going to just do it correctly the first time to make sure that it works. Okay, so it says, congratulations, you guessed all 4 numbers. It took you 1 try. Perfect. Let me do a couple. So I guess 0 correct there. 0 correct there. I'll try it so that it's correct again, and then it shows that I took 3 tries. So there's 1 try there, 1 try there, 1 try there. One thing I do want to do, though, I do want to space this out a little bit. And so what I want to space out is probably this part right here. I'll space this out a little bit. And the way I'm going to do that is put a / and n at the top and at the bottom of the string. So that'll print space above this line and space below. And I'm going to do the same thing for these two. For these 2 lines. And we'll see what it looks like. We'll see if that looks a little cleaner. But it should be nice and clean and like easy to read. So okay, please guess a number. I'll try it correctly again. Cool. So there's a nice space there. Let's get it wrong. Okay. And cool. So we've got nice spaces, and then now it's, see how it says it took 4 tries? It's clear to see those. You can clearly see those 4 tries. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now there's a lot more you can do with this game, but that is the gist of how it works. You can actually go in and update your code to basically let the user know if they guessed a correct number and if it's in the wrong space. Because at the moment you have to guess all 4 numbers in their correct spaces for you to win. Otherwise, it's just going to keep going until you guess the right number. So that is it for the Mastermind tutorial. If you have any comments or questions, drop them in the chat box. Otherwise, see you next time.